The most probable outcome of successfully articulating an emotion that has accrued without expression over time is tears, an admission of vulnerability and pain, which are also feelings that people do not like to allow, particularly when they are feeling distrustful and angry. Who wants to dig down into the depths of pain and grief and guilt until the tears emerge? The first reading is from Rule 3. And to remind you, Rule 3 is do not hide unwanted things in the fog. And this is from a subsection entitled, What is the Fog? Imagine that you are afraid. You have reason to be. You're afraid of yourself. You're afraid of other people. You're afraid of the world. You are nostalgic for the innocence of the past, for the time before you learned the terrible things that shattered the trust characterizing your childhood. The knowledge you have gained of yourself, other people, and the world has embittered more than enlightened. You've been betrayed, hurt, and disappointed. You've become distrustful even of hope itself, as your hope has been repeatedly shattered. And that is the very definition of hopelessness. The last thing you want to know is more. Better to leave what is enshrouded in mystery. Better as well to avoid thinking too much or at all about what could be. When ignorance is bliss, after all, 'tis folly to be wise. Imagine more precisely that you are so afraid that you will not allow yourself even to know what you want. Knowing would simultaneously mean hoping, and your hopes have been dashed. You have your reasons for maintaining your ignorance. You're afraid, perhaps, that there is nothing worth wanting. You're afraid that if you specify what you want precisely, you will simultaneously discover, and all too clearly, what constitutes failure. You are afraid that failure is the most likely outcome. And finally, you are afraid that if you define failure and then fail, you will know beyond a shadow of a doubt that it was you that failed and that it was your fault. So you do not allow yourself to know what you want. You manage this by refusing to think it through. You are happy, satisfied, and engaged sometimes, and unhappy, frustrated, and nihilistic other times, but you will not inquire deeply into why, because then you would know. And then you would encounter yet again shattered hope and confirmed disappointment. You are also afraid, but for different reasons, to allow others to know what you want. First, if they were to find out just what you wanted, then they might tell you, and then you would know, even if you were fighting against gathering that very knowledge. Second, if they knew, they could then deny you what you truly wanted, even needed, and hurt you much more efficiently than they might if your deepest desires, and therefore your vulnerabilities, remained secret. The fog that hides is the refusal to notice, to attend to, emotions and motivational states as they arise, and the refusal to communicate them both to yourself and to the people who are close to you. A bad mood signifies something. A state of anxiety or sadness signifies something, and not likely something that will please you to discover. The most probable outcome of successfully articulating an emotion that has accrued without expression over time is tears, an admission of vulnerability and pain, which are also feelings that people do not like to allow, particularly when they are feeling distrustful and angry. Who wants to dig down into the depths of pain and grief and guilt until the tears emerge? And voluntary refusal to take notice of our emotional states is not the only impediment to dealing with them. If your wife or husband, or whomever else you are tangled up with unhappily at the moment, says something that comes too close to the painful truth, for example, then a sharp and insulting remark will often shut them up, and is therefore very likely to be offered. This is partly a test. Does the person being insulted care enough about you and your suffering to dig past a few obstacles and to unearth the bitter truth. It is also partly and more obviously defensive. If you can chase someone away from something you yourself do not want to discover, that makes your life easier in the present. Sadly, it is also very disappointing if that defense succeeds, and is typically accompanied by a sense of abandonment, loneliness, and self-betrayal. You must nonetheless still live among other people, and they with you. And you have desires, wants, needs, and however unstated and unclear. And you are still motivated to pursue them, not least because it is impossible to live without desire, want, and need. Your strategy under such conditions? Show your disappointment when someone close to you makes you unhappy. Allow yourself the luxury and pleasure of resentment when something does not go your way. Ensure that the person who has transgressed against you is frozen out by your disapproval. Force them to discover with as much difficulty as possible exactly what they have done to disappoint you. And finally, let them grope around blindly in the fog that you have generated around yourself until they stumble into and injure themselves on the sharp hidden edges of your unrevealed preferences and dreams. And maybe these responses are tests too. Tests deeply associated with the lack of courage to trust. If you really loved me, you would brave the terrible landscape that I have arrayed around myself to discover the real me. And perhaps there is even something to such claims, implicit though they may be. A certain testing of commitment might have its utility. Everything does not have to be given away for free. But even a little unnecessary mystery goes a long way. And you must still live with yourself. In the short term, perhaps you are protected from the revelation of your insufficiency by your refusal to make yourself clear. Every ideal is a judge, after all. The judge who says, you are not manifesting your true potential. No ideals? No judge. But the price paid for that is purposelessness. This is a high price. No purpose, then no positive emotion, as most of what drives us forward with hope intact is the experience of approaching something we deeply need and want. And worse, when we are without purpose, chronic, overwhelming anxiety, as focused purpose constrains what is otherwise likely to be the intolerable chaos of unexploited possibility and too much choice. If you make what you want clear and commit yourself to its pursuit, you may fail. But if you do not make what you want clear, then you will certainly fail. You cannot hit a target that you refuse to see. You cannot hit a target if you do not take aim. And equally dangerously, in both cases, you will not accrue the advantage of aiming, but missing. You will not benefit from the learning that inevitably takes place when things do not go your way. Success at a given endeavor often means trying, falling short, recalibrating with the new knowledge generated painfully by the failure, and then trying again and falling short, often repeated ad nauseum. Sometimes all that learning, impossible without the failure, leads you to see that aiming your ambition in a different direction would be better. Not because it is easier, not because you have given up, not because you are avoiding, but because you have learned through the vicissitudes of your experience that what you seek is not to be found where you were looking, or is simply not attainable in the manner by which you chose to pursue it. So, what might you do? What should you do as an alternative to hiding things in the fog? Admit to your feelings. This is a very tricky matter, and it does not simply mean give in to them. First, noting, much less communicating, feelings of petty anger or pain due to lonesomeness or anxiety about something that might be trivial or jealousy that is likely unwarranted is embarrassing. The admission of such feelings is a revelation of ignorance, insufficiency, and vulnerability. Second, it is unsettling to allow for the possibility that your feelings, however overwhelming and convincing, might be misplaced and in your ignorance pointing you in the wrong direction. It is possible that you have misinterpreted the situation entirely, for reasons of which you remain fundamentally unconscious. It is for such reasons that trust is vital, but trust of the mature and tragic sort. A naive person trusts because he or she believes that people are essentially or even universally trustworthy. But any person who has truly lived has been or has betrayed. Someone with experience knows that people are capable of deception and willing to deceive. That knowledge brings with it an arguably justified pessimism about human nature, personal and otherwise, but it also opens the door to another kind of faith in humanity, one based on courage rather than naivete. I will trust you. I will extend my hand to you, despite the risk of betrayal, because it is possible, through trust, to bring out the best in you and perhaps in me. So I will accept substantial risk to open the door to cooperation and negotiation. And even if you do betray me in a not too unforgivable manner, assuming a certain degree, shall we say, of genuine apology and contrition on your part, I will continue to extend my hand. And part of the way I will do that is by telling you what I am feeling. A certain necessary humility must accompany such raw revelations. I should not say, at least not ideally, you have been ignoring me lately. I should say, instead, I feel isolated and lonely and hurt, and cannot help but feel that you have not been as attentive to me over the last few months as I would have liked, or that might have been best for us as a couple. But I'm unsure if I am just imagining all this because I'm upset, or if I am genuinely seeing what's going on. The latter statement gets the point across, but avoids the accusatory stance that so often serves as a first defense against a serious get-to-the-bottom-of-things conversation. And it's very possible that you are wrong about just what it is that is causing you to feel the way you do. If you are, you need to know it, because there's no point in propagating errors that are causing you and others pain and interfering with your future. Best to find out what is true, best to disperse the fog, and find out if the sharp objects you feared were lurking there are real or fantastical. And there is always the danger that some of them are real, but it is better to see them than to keep them occluded by the fog, because you can at least sometimes avoid the danger that you are willing to see.